Hello, and welcome to another edition of Ask the Professor, a crowd-driven feature. We're dependent on your funding to keep it in production. We're dependent on your questions to keep it going because we never seed it with our own. They're all real viewers' questions. You can ask about politics, you can ask about economics, history, political philosophy, culture, all those things that matter to us in our common life.
It's even allowed to ask about architecture.
You can ask me about architecture.
All right, here's
John Ruskin, a pyramid, I'm ready.
All right, here's Matthew, and he says, the Globe and Mail recently reported that the Liberals had been appointing more women than men to federal judge positions, despite women being a minority of available candidates. The government's defenders say that if every appointee is qualified, which is a pass or fail criterion, the Employment Equity Act's requirements are met. But isn't this discriminatory? And if so, how can the government legally sustain anti-discrimination policies?
Well, that's an excellent question, and I think we need to start with some common sense here. Yes, if you're expressing a preference for one gender over another for a job that ostensibly is not about gender, then you are discriminating. You may be choosing among qualified candidates, but you are making your final selection based on a criterion that is not, on the face of it, a prerequisite for being a judge. On the other hand, let's try to be fair here, the claim is that because women have traditionally been underrepresented, both as candidates and as appointees, in order to get to a situation where gender is not being considered, we need to go through a detour where gender is considered. And the same argument, of course, has been made about race more lately. It's been made about sexual orientation. It's been made about religious convictions. In all kinds of areas, the argument has been that given a past that was discriminatory, formal neutrality in the present is not the acme of fairness. But before we address that argument, let us insist on a certain degree of frankness. Yes, it's discrimination. And, discrimination is not always a bad thing. I mean, when we marry, we discriminate, don't we? For one thing, heterosexuals only marry members of the opposite sex. That's discrimination. That's saying if I'm a man, I'm not going to marry a man no matter what a wonderful person he is. Homosexuals discriminate in the other direction. They say if a male homosexual is going to get married, he's going to marry a man. I mean, wide range of choices among them, all kinds of personal criteria. But that's discrimination. So is it discrimination if, for instance, a fitness club declares itself women only because they feel that women may be uncomfortable exercising in the presence of men. So not all acts of discrimination are wrong. Where we do now think discrimination is wrong is when we do it on the basis of criteria that are not relevant to the decision. And again, I'm going to, at this point, put personal relationships aside, because if somebody has a weakness for people with a particular hair color, we're not going to, I hope, summon the law and say, well, no, you're not being fair, even if it seems to us that it's not strictly rational in terms of your ultimate happiness, whether their hair happens to be blonde or brunette or something else. But putting that aside, the real question is, what happens when you're discriminating in appointing judges? And certainly, yes, it is possible that a determined policy of affirmative action would lead you to pick unqualified candidates. But the claim of the Liberals, and let us take it at face value here because it certainly could be true, is that they're not doing that. They are only appointing from a pool of people, all of whom are qualified, women preferentially. And they would make the same argument presumably about their gender equal cabinet, that everybody they chose was qualified to be in cabinet. They then, from that pool, insisted on picking an equal number of women and men. And you might suggest that some of their picks were not qualified, but it might not always be the women. However, the problem is, leaving aside the danger that you might actually pick somebody unqualified, if you are picking people for reasons other than their qualifications for the job, you are necessarily putting them in a false position. And you are, no matter what arguments you make about the past, committing an act of injustice because of the fact that to tell somebody, because of something that somebody else did, something in which you had no involvement, you are now not going to get something to which you are in fact entitled. You're the best person for the job, but because some man now long dead didn't let a woman into law school 50 years ago, you can't have it. That is an act of injustice. And that brings me to the question of Canada's laws. How can this be sustained given Canada's anti-discrimination laws? And the answer is very simple. Canada's anti-discrimination laws are written to permit discrimination. As our Constitution guarantees equal treatment and then immediately turns around and takes it back, saying it's okay to have affirmative action, despite that. So it's all legal in the sense of positive law. It does fit what's on the statute books. But the question is what's in the statute books fair? And that takes us to this very deep question: is the solution to past injustice to commit injustice in the present? Shall we adopt precisely those behaviors we deplore and are determined to eradicate in order to eradicate them? Shall we fight fire with fire? And, people sometimes say we shouldn't fight fire with fire, we should fight fire with water. But the fact is sometimes you use a small fire to create a fire break to stop a big fire from spreading. The metaphor actually does make sense, unlike, for instance, shooting fish in a barrel. If anybody can explain to me why you'd want to do that unless you wanted to be covered with small bits of fish, I'd love to hear it, but I digress. In my view, the most qualified person should get the job for the sake both of those people who are receiving the service, and justice is not a trivial service here. It's extremely important for the sake of those who should not be denied a job, and for the sake of those who get it. Because if the government says we will pick women in preference over men, then any woman who gets the job is getting a pat on the head along with the keys to the office. Now, and the important point is, many of those women would have gotten the job anyway. So they're actually qualified purely on merit, but instead they're told, well, you're getting merit plus the Y chromosome. X chromosome. I got that wrong, didn't I?
Yes, you did.
Right. Okay.
But you know which one we meant.
Good. It's not a science lecture. Yeah. So they're being insulted. And the people who come into their court are being given a misleading impression in those cases that this person might not be as qualified as they ought to be. That there could have been a better judge hearing their case. And when you're in court, I'm telling you, it is such a nerve-wracking, expensive, miserable experience. The thought that you might also be facing a judge who's there for some reason other than excellence would be acutely distressing. So I think it calls the whole system into question. And finally, there is this consideration. If we are now so outraged at past discrimination that we will tolerate affirmative action in a misguided effort to set right the wrongs of the past, is it not surely the case that we have moved beyond those wrongs? That we don't need affirmative action at this point to ensure that all qualified women get jobs? Should we not make our standard, we shall do justice in the present because we are appalled by injustice in the past? And if we do that, I have no doubt there will be plenty of women judges. There will be plenty of women lawyers. And everybody will know that the process is clean. When you prefer candidates, even qualified ones, for reasons not related to the job, the system is tarnished. So yes, it's legal, but no, we shouldn't do it, and we should change the law to say there shall be no discrimination on the basis of irrelevant characteristics, including that you like or are sympathetic to a gender, as well as that you do not like or are hostile to it. We treat everybody equally before the law. That is justice. It's the only kind of justice. It's what was wrong with discrimination in the past. It's still wrong with discrimination in the present, that it doesn't abide by that fundamental principle.
Yeah, and speaking as a francophone woman from Quebec, right? Obviously, I benefit from two of those positive criteria. And I never liked this idea that, well, did I get the job because I was a woman and a francophone, or did I get the job because I was the best candidate? I never knew. And I never liked that feeling.
Yeah, you plant those seeds, weeds grow in the minds of everybody, including
that's a good
the intended
metaphor.
recipient.
All right.
Thank you. That
All
beats the XY confusion, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Thanks for that. Thanks for that question, Matthew. And if you would like to play along and ask your question of the professor, go to the URL on your screen, and everything there will be explained. Thanks, and see you next time.